Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Aaron Thormundson, and the right for ex-felons, probationers, and parolees to vote is protected by the 15th Amendment and the Voters' Right Act of 1965. In this argument, I'll be outlining some basic facts about this subject, why my argument is correct, an argument against it, and my rebuttal to it. So let's quickly go over what is going on here. Currently, 11 states in the United States do not allow ex-felons, probationers, or parolees to vote. 46 out of 48 of the United States do not allow any one of those three groups to vote. That makes up 2.5% of the entire voting populace. Now, these laws are designated by states. The states get to choose which groups get a vote and which groups don't. In some states, that goes upwards of 10% of the populace. KQED, a PBS station, did a very extensive study on this and found that 1.5 million people in Florida who are voting age do not have the right to vote because they are ex-felons. Now, you may ask, how does the 15th Amendment defend their right to vote? The 15th Amendment explicitly says that your right to vote cannot be restricted based off of a previous condition of servitude. Being an ex-felon means that you are no longer in jail or in prison. You are amongst society and the citizens of that society. Therefore, you are no longer in the servitude of the prisons, of the correctional facilities, and the system which we have for correcting them. Therefore, they must have their rights restored, because that is what the 15th Amendment says. Secondly, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 explicitly states that the right to vote cannot be restricted by a person's ethnicity or a person's gender. Now, many of you know that the voting system currently has a disproportionate number of minorities, but you may say, and may say accurately, that is correlation, not causation. They are not directly related. Well, let me present this to you. Before the Civil War in 1850, only 38% of the states in the Union had a law restricting these people's rights to vote. As of 2002, 96% of the states had a mandate like this. This must bring the two together. This is a direct correlation between a racist institute's ability to inflict prejudice upon minorities being taken away and
finding a loophole to alter that. Now, the most simple argument against this is that parolees and, probationers have not been truly released from the correctional institute. They are still a part of the correctional system, as they still need to go to parole officers and so on. So how are they not excused, how are they defended by the 15th Amendment? Servitude, as defined by the Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, is somebody who lacks liberty. Now, someone who is a parolee or probationer has been released from prison, but has a few small restrictions to what they can do. Therefore, it is fairly clear to say that as they are allowed to mingle with us as citizens, their liberties have been more or less restored. So if they are no longer under the servitude of prison, they should have their rights restored, their rights to vote. In this argument, I went over some few basic facts about ex-felons, parolees, and probationers. I went over how the 15th Amendment and the Rights to Vote Act of 1965 defends their right to vote. I went over a brief argument against it and rebutted it. Thank you for your time.
Like, no, if the,
All right, Aaron, the propositions identified at the beginning of the speech, which is good. It does have two parts to the second section, and I think that's a little complicated. You probably need a covering term for both the 15th Amendment and the Voting Rights Act. Those are going to be secondary points in the presentation, and I think they should be distinct secondary points, probably phrased as claims. The problem with the preview and with the body of the speech and with the summary is that most of the supporting points that you present are not really phrased as declarative statements. They're often explanations or narratives about how you perceive something. A couple of times there's even a question. So you need to be a little bit more definitive. And it's an explanation about how you're working through this process as opposed to what the argument is on these things. I think the closest you come to making a very clear argument is on the 15th Amendment, where you say it clearly applies in this situation because you have a definition that you use of servitude, and then there's this argument about liberty. By the way, those two arguments are in two separate places, and why they're not together on the argument was not very clear. That's another one of the reasons why I think the organization feels a little bit random, like you're just thinking out loud and coming up with these things, and here's the next thing that I need to face, instead of kind of collecting them together and building an argument around the supporting contentions there. I think that you do have a good piece of evidence that talked about the number of states. You've got some factual data about the number of states that have these restrictions. I do think you want to give us a source citation on that. You do give us a source citation for the 1.5 million people in Florida who don't have a right to vote because they're ex-felons. Apparently, all the ex-felons in the country moved to Florida. I guess that seems like a little bit weird. So I think
I have
that'll have
two sources for that.
No,
so
no,
I'm double check those.
like I said, I'm sure there'll be some discussion of what's going on there. The inference that you make about the change in the laws prior to the Civil War versus after the Civil War, it seems to suggest that everything that came after the Civil War was all an attempt by people to suppress ethnic groups. That's a big inferential leap that you're making, and without much data except this statistical correlation, which I think is probably problematic. So I think you're going to need to find, for example, if you could correlate it with Jim Crow laws, that would be maybe a way to make that argument a little bit stronger. You do a nice job speaking to the audience. I think that that's fine. The summary's okay, except that it's doing the same thing, kind of recapping some of those those comments that you're making that aren't always claims, they're more like explanations and narrative. And I thought it was clear. I understood your argument at the end. I do think, like I said, it needed to be a little bit more closely organized in the middle. All right. Merci.